Story 1: A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. My girlfriend and I have rented plenty of Airbnbs over the years, but none of the experiences that we've had in any of them compared to the one we had in Florida. We'd been planning this getaway for months, the kind of trip where you leave all your worries packed away in the closet back home and just soak up some sunshine. Florida seemed like the perfect escape, a chance for my girlfriend and I to recharge those rundown batteries of ours. I remember us singing to some old 90s hits on the radio as we cruised down the highway, our spirits as high as the clear blue sky. The Airbnb was a picture-perfect beach house, the kind that you'd swear was plucked straight from a postcard. It had this beautiful little porch with a view that overlooked the ocean, where the waves would roll in hypnotically, and the sand was so white it could have been mistaken for sugar. That first day, we did nothing but laze around on that beautiful beach. The sun was bright, and the breeze felt amazing. It was one of those moments when life felt simple. For me, a guy who's been riding the roller coaster of the financial industry for the better part of a decade, simplicity is something I crave more than anything. In that industry, you're always one decision away from a breakthrough or a breakdown, and the pressure can squeeze you tighter than a size too small suit. The next day was more of the same bliss. As we lounged on the beach, a man approached us. He had his 2 kids in tow, a boy and a girl, both with those innocent smiles that make you think of childhood summers. They ran straight for the water, giggling and kicking up sand. The man struck up a conversation, just friendly chit-chat at first, but then he started asking more personal questions. I've always been a bit too open for my own good, so I found myself telling him about my job, how I've been fortunate enough to climb the ladder, and how it's afforded us the luxuries we sometimes take for granted. He seemed genuinely interested, nodding and asking the kind of questions that encourage you to boast a little. He asked where we were staying, and without a second thought, I pointed out our Airbnb, sitting just behind us. He nodded his head and chatted a little bit more before he wrapped up the conversation, herded his kids up, and headed out. My girlfriend and I didn't give it a second thought. Why would we? The guy had kids with him, and who doesn't like talking about their successes every now and then? Little did we know that our sweet little vacation would go from happiness to horror. As the sun went down, we were back inside our temporary slice of paradise. Around 8 p.m., an unexpected knock rattled the front door. My girlfriend and I exchanged puzzled looks, wondering who it could be. I peered through the peephole and was met with the sight of a stranger. "Hello?" I called out, keeping the door shut. The man on the other side was adamant that he'd rented the place for the night. I explained, as calmly as I could, that he was mistaken, that we'd booked the Airbnb for the entire weekend. But he wouldn't let up, his tone growing more demanding by the second. The man pleaded with me to open the door so that we could discuss the mix-up and get it straightened out, but something didn't feel right. Glancing out the window, I saw a car parked on the street with its engine running. It was too convenient, too suspicious. "Sorry, man, I'm not opening the door," I called out. This did not settle well with the man. He began banging on the door violently and kicking it. The encounter was now sending my girlfriend into a panicked frenzy. That's when I remembered. I'd brought my gun, a precaution I took more out of habit than actual concern for needing it. As the man's knocks grew into heavy bangs, I retrieved my gun. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, just something to tip the scales enough for him to back off. "Call the cops," I said to my girlfriend as I retrieved it, and hurried my way back to the window. There, I tapped it against the window, making sure he saw it. His reaction was immediate. He sprinted to the car, jumping in the back seat. As the car peeled away, I got a glimpse at the driver and another man in the front passenger seat. I couldn't believe what I saw. The man, sitting there in the passenger seat, was the man from the beach. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The questions, the friendly demeanor, it was all an act, a way to scope out potential targets, to catch us off guard. These guys weren't just random opportunists, they were calculated, using a facade of family fun to lower defenses and gather information. When the police arrived, we gave our statement. Turns out, they'd been on the lookout for a group pulling the same con on other tourists. A few weeks later, we heard the news. 3 men arrested, including the guy who'd played the part of the harmless father on the beach. The kids were his niece and nephew, and he was using them as a means to soften his approach to unsuspecting victims, unbeknownst to the kid's mother. It's a strange feeling, knowing you were that close to being a victim of something terrible. It sticks with you. It's a lesson that not every friendly face is what it seems. Anybody could be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Story 2. Vengeful Guest. I've always been a bit of an outdoors guy, but working 60-hour weeks at the office had left me with little time to enjoy the wilderness. That's why when my buddy told me about this cabin in the woods you could rent on Airbnb, I didn't think twice. He said it was a great spot to unwind. So there I was, driving my old Jeep through the dense forest to a place I found online, expecting nothing but the sound of crickets and owls in the night. The cabin was straight out of one of those old wilderness paintings. You know, the ones with the big front porch, a couple of rocking chairs, and that homey feel. I remember pulling up and thinking, this is it, this is perfect. Unloading my stuff, I could feel the stress melting off me with every step I took towards that front door. The first few hours were exactly what I hoped for. I popped open a beer, sat on the porch, and just listened. There was a kind of music to the woods that city life drowns out. As the evening crept in, I grilled a steak and soaked in the solitude. When night fell, I settled in front of the fireplace. The flames flickered and danced, and it was as close to heaven as I'd ever felt. It was cozy, almost hypnotic, but the feeling didn't last. You know that sense you get when you think someone's watching you? I began to feel that, but every time I glanced out the window, I saw nothing, just my own reflection and the dark outline of the trees against the sky. I tried to shake it off and decided to call it a night, hoping sleep would reset everything. But then, just as I was dozing off, I heard a huge bang. It was so loud and sudden, my heart went from 0 to 100 in a blink. I've heard noises in the night before, a branch falling, an animal nosing around. But this was different. This was deliberate. With my heart punching at 100 miles per hour, I approached the door, every horror movie I'd ever seen playing in my head. Opening it, I half expected to be met with some axe murderer's grin. Instead, what I found was a rabbit. It was dead. Its lifeless body looked like it had been thrown there, intentionally. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just a motionless body lying there. It didn't add up. The panic that hit wasn't the adrenaline kind you get when you're pumped. It was cold, heavy. It filled my chest and didn't let go. I felt exposed, vulnerable. After I slammed the door shut and dialed the cops, I spent the next hour pacing around the cabin, every creak and crackle of the woodwork making me jump. The officers who showed up were locals, familiar with the woods and the wildlife. They took a look around, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but they came back with nothing. They said it could be kids messing around or someone with a sick sense of humor. They told me to lock up and call again if anything else happened. But even after they left, the sense of security that should have come with their presence just wasn't there. The next day, I reached out to the host, a nice enough guy who seemed as perplexed as I was. He confirmed no one had ever reported anything like this before. Nevertheless, the harrowing ordeal soured my excitement for the retreat, and I canceled the rest of my reservation. As the weeks passed on, the events of that night never left my mind. With curiosity clawing at me, I kept track of the listings' reviews, seeing if anyone had experienced anything similar to what I had. Stories from other guests trickled in, each one with a tale of late-night frights, things just weird enough to make you want to leave and never come back. A few months later, the full picture of what was truly going on out at that cabin came to light. Late one night, the cops pulled over a guy for speeding, not very far from the cabin. As they spoke with the individual, he seemed nervous and erratic. Upon closer inspection of his vehicle, there in the trunk of his car, they found a dead rabbit. After pressing the man for some time, he admitted to being the one behind the disturbances. He was a previous guest, a vengeful guest, who'd had some minor disagreement with the host. His way of getting back was to sabotage the cabin's reputation, to drive guests away with fear, hoping they'd plaster the internet with bad reviews. When I think back on that weekend, my mind is a mix of anger towards the vengeful guest and sadness for the host, It's a story I've shared with some of my friends, a modern-day cautionary tale of how far some people will go over the smallest things. And while I still love the woods, maybe next time, I'll go somewhere with a few more people around, just in case. Story 3. Fog over the farmhouse. When my wife and I initially planned our Austin getaway with close friends, we meticulously picked an Airbnb that seemed perfect for our long weekend, a quaint spot right in the heart of the city, close to bustling bistros and the indie music scene we were so eager to immerse ourselves in. But as luck would have it, a last-minute plumbing catastrophe at our chosen locale left us scrambling for a plan B. Scouring the internet for another place wasn't just frustrating, it was downright stressful, knowing that our well-planned vacation hung precariously in the balance. We finally found a place, though it was a stretch beyond our budget. The listing showcased a modern farmhouse with an aesthetic that seemed straight out of a high-end home magazine. It promised seclusion and tranquility, a stark contrast to our original urban pick, but with our options running low, we took the plunge. The hosts were responsive, and within an hour, we had our new accommodation lined up. Our GPS guided us through the outskirts of Austin until we turned down a gravel path that led to the property. That's when the butterflies in my stomach started fluttering wildly. A towering wrought iron gate stood guard at the entrance, the kind you'd expect at the forefront of some old estate, not a rental property. I felt a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable wariness as I stepped out to punch in the gate code. My eyes couldn't help but wander over to the left, where a small cemetery lay under the shadow of knotted oak trees. The tombstones were weathered and worn, suggesting they'd been there for generations. To our right, a sprawling car junkyard with rusted heaps scattered haphazardly overgrown with Texas sagebrush presented a stark juxtaposition to the deathly silence of the cemetery. The scene was peculiar, such an odd trio: a cemetery, a junkyard, and a stunning modern farmhouse. As we waited for the gate to draw open, I couldn't shake off the eerie sensation that we were stepping into a chapter of Austin's history that few knew about. When the gate finally creaked open, we drove down the winding path, flanked on both sides by towering fence posts that felt more like sentinels than mere decorations. When the farmhouse came into view, it was as though we'd stepped onto a movie set designed to embody rustic elegance. The wraparound porch was adorned with rocking chairs and hanging plants that swayed gently in the breeze, almost as if greeting us. We grabbed our bags and made our way to the front door, trying to shake off the disconcerting welcome committee we'd just passed. The moment we entered, the feeling of unease began to dissolve. The interior of the farmhouse was breathtaking. The crystal chandelier hanging in the foyer cast a kaleidoscope of light across the walls. The vaulted ceilings soared high above us, and the loft overlooking the living area hinted at cozy evenings. It was clear the house was designed with love, every detail meticulously chosen to create a sense of warmth and luxury. We explored each room with growing excitement, admiring the blend of rustic charm and modern amenities, unaware that the strange occurrences of the night would soon give us a new, less inviting perspective of this beautiful abode. The sun had dipped below the horizon when the charm of the house began to unravel, and a less welcoming ambiance took its place. At first, it was the flickering of lights that caught our attention, an occasional dimming that would have been easy to dismiss as a quirk of rural living if not for the precision with which it happened, as if someone were playing with a dimmer switch. We joked about it, making light of the situation, but an unsettling undercurrent ran through our laughter. The noises from outside, too, became a topic of nervous jest. They were peculiar, rustlings and the occasional clank that sounded like it was coming from the junkyard, as if the metallic carcasses were settling in for the night. The unease solidified the next morning when we woke to a landscape swallowed by fog. It was a dense, enveloping fog, the kind that dampens sounds and makes the world feel smaller, more constricted. We had planned to explore Austin that day, but the fog was a thick white curtain, impenetrable and unyielding, delaying our departure. It seemed to press against the windows with an almost sentient force, and I found myself peering into the milky whiteness, half expecting something to be looking back. There was a stillness, a silence that pressed upon our ears, save for the occasional drip of condensation from the eaves. The fog didn't lift until well past noon, and by then, our enthusiasm for venturing out had dampened considerably. That second night, the shift from odd to outright alarming occurred. I had fallen into a restless sleep, only to be jolted awake by the unmistakable feeling of being touched. It was a firm pressure on my shoulder, like a hand trying to roll me over. I snapped upright, my breath caught in my throat, but there was nothing there, just the shadowy corners of the room and the soft sound of my wife's breathing, undisturbed beside me. The room felt colder than before, and I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself, trying to convince my racing heart that it was just a dream. But sleep remained elusive. Each creak and groan of the house now felt like a harbinger of something lurking just out of sight. During the days, the attic door would catch my eye, as if it were calling out to be noticed. It sat atop of the loft, inconspicuously placed, but somehow foreboding. The note from the owners echoed in my mind, a seemingly nonchalant request to avoid the attic, which now piqued our curiosity with a morbid sort of allure. Why emphasize this single off-limits area in such a lavishly welcoming home? Each time I passed by the door, a chill would trace the length of my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being closely watched, as though eyes were tracking my every move, biding their time until curiosity would win out. The mystery of the attic consumed my thoughts. The peculiar old door, with its faded paint and antique handle, seemed to hold secrets just beyond reach. Throughout our stay, the door had been a subtle presence in the back of my mind, an enigmatic piece of the farmhouse's puzzle that the owner's note had turned into an almost forbidden fruit. Their casual warning, intended to deter, had only stoked the flames of curiosity. Was it merely storage, a place for forgotten heirlooms, or something more? I found myself concocting theories, each more outlandish than the last, but the truth remained locked away, just as we were instructed to leave it. That evening, the sense of an unseen presence became overwhelming. As the shadows lengthened and merged, the farmhouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a vessel for something malevolent and watching. The charged air seemed to hum with silent chords of unease. I wrestled with the thought of leaving without exploring the attic, without understanding what lay beyond that door, which seemed to serve as a boundary between the known and the unknown. In the thick of our packing, a small, forgotten photograph fell from between the cushions of the plush sofa. It depicted the farmhouse, or rather, an older, more primitive version of it, standing solemnly in black and white. The people in the picture, a group that could have been a family, bore grim expressions that were common in pictures of the era, but seemed to carry a particular weight here. They were dressed in somber attire, typical of a bygone century, standing rigid and stoic before the house. On the back, scrawled in ink that had faded to a ghost of its original self, were the words, "They don't rest." The message sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel as though the eyes of the photographed faces were staring straight through me, their somber gazes heavy with a tale untold. That final night, the house felt like it was closing in on us. The dense fog returned with a vengeance, as if the previous day's phenomenon was just a rehearsal. The fog was a thick shroud outside, more oppressive than ever, and it seemed to leach into the farmhouse, muffling sound and casting everything in a haze. The flickering of the lights escalated into a frenetic dance, leaving us in alternating moments of stark illumination and suffocating darkness. The unexplained noises grew louder, more frequent, and seemed to surround the house. Sounds that I had tried to write off as wildlife or the wind now took on a more desperate quality, a cacophony that seemed to be closing in on us from all sides. They were no longer just the benign settling of an old structure, but carried a sense of intention, as if the house itself was trying to communicate through creaks and groans. It was as if the very essence of the farmhouse was altered, the once welcoming atmosphere replaced by a pressing, ominous dread. Every hair on my body stood on end, a primal reaction to the feeling of being hunted or haunted. Our conversation dwindled to whispers, our movements to cautious steps, the sense of urgency to leave growing with every heartbeat. Sleep was a battle lost before it began. Our last night was spent in a state of vigilance, a long, drawn-out moment suspended in the strange energy that enveloped the farmhouse. We barely spoke, each of us lost in our own unease, counting the minutes until the sky would begin to lighten. When the first weak rays of dawn finally broke through the fog, we were already packed and ready, the car loaded with a haste born of fear. As we drove away, the house receded into the fog like a specter retreating into oblivion. The tightness in my chest eased with each mile we put between us and the farmhouse, but a cascade of questions remained. We left not with the contentment of a holiday's end, but with the ragged edges of an experience that would haunt us for a long time to come. The relief of departure was tinged with the unease of unresolved mysteries, and the lingering sensation of eyes that might still be watching from the windows of that modern farmhouse, hidden away in the embrace of Austin's foggy outskirts.